Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It's like 3 tries to get my microphone to unmute this morning. Okay, which was just as well, as I took a little nap while I was pressing the button in between. Good morning. We're ready to go. It is, well, I don't know why I'm lying to you first thing. We're not ready to go. It's Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020. I'm fairly certain I'm okay on that one. Just, double checking to make sure all computers say the same thing. Who knows? All the days meld together today. All the rotten, nasty, awful things that are happening meld together. We'll do our best to remember which ones we've covered and which ones we have not. Greg Dworkin will be here shortly to help us figure some of that out. I think he keeps notes as well. Bill in Portland, Maine, in between feeding squirrels, has outlined an excellent approach to the day for us. Daily Co's Radio is live now. That's now, as in currently. Kagro X, David Waldman. Me. Hi, everybody. Kagro X proudly welcomes new sponsor. I know, it feels like it should be a sponsor. Bumblebee brand tuna products, the official weapon/canned animal protein of Antifa. It's true. I signed the deal myself. It's fantastic. Free tuna for life. And really, that was the rallying cry that we used in. I presume we were all looting the cans of tuna from the stores and not purchasing them as part of the antiquated, cruel, and oppressive capitalist system. But I don't know, maybe your mileage may vary. Perhaps you were buying it to keep the workers at the grocery store gainfully employed. I don't know. At any rate, it turns out I learned this. You learn something new every day. And last night I learned from the President of the United States, a learned type person and, of course, trusted figure in American discourse, that Antifa, which is basically you, me, and everybody else out there, have been rioting not in Portland, Oregon, but in Portland, Maine, as it turns out. And I don't know what's going on exactly, but as it turns out, I don't know. For good measure, let's say both cities are in ruins. And you've been doing it with what I assume is incendiary tuna fish, because the new weapon of choice, as it turns out, according to the President of the United States, last week, you'll recall, it was bags of soup, or perhaps 2 weeks ago, bags of soup, those dangerous soup Molotov cocktails, I guess, which have now since being ridiculed brilliantly, I should say, the other day on TikTok by a couple of goofy teenage kids who did a fantastic job with lampooning this whole thing. That's all out now. So if you thought you were keeping up with the kids by saying cans of soup, I can buy cans of soup. I know how to do that. I'll be hip and cool and fresh, like the youth of today, or a couple of years ago, or a couple of decades ago, by buying cans of soup as a sign of my willingness to battle against oppressive fascist forces in the street, or feed my family. And now the hot new thing is cans of tuna, which is a little odd for a number of reasons, not the least of which, I guess, just starting at the surface, is, of course, the president's claim that people were buying, as he said, bags of soup. I think he meant bags of cans of soup, but whatever. Anyway, the cans, he claimed, were being used as weapons, projectiles, that people were throwing them at police because they were, according to the president, tiny hands, the perfect size to throw, because you can't throw a brick, it's too heavy, but a can of soup is perfect, and as several have amply demonstrated, it can be thrown in a tight spiral, which is helpful in terms of getting extra distance out of your throw. And a brick, that is harder to throw in a spiral. But of course, people have been hurling bricks since the early days of, everything, because brick throwing is kind of a go-to street weapon, honestly, back from, I guess, let's say the Egyptian days. But anyway, he decided that cans of soup was the real menace, but last night he decided that cans of tuna, but specifically bumblebee tuna. And he promised everybody that was the case, making clear to everybody that it was, in fact, that he had checked this out, bumblebee brand tuna that was being bought. Now, why you would buy premium brand name tuna if you were going to throw it, I have no idea, unless you were throwing it as tuna salad. He didn't say necessarily that people were leaving it in the can, but that's what I guessed was happening. By the way, I would think actually harder to throw cans of tuna great distances and have some real heft behind the throw than a can of soup, quite honestly. Now, a couple other people have examined the fluid dynamics of it and claim that smooth soups, clear soups, or bisques that are more consistent in their density and consistency throughout the can probably throw better than the chunky style soups. But I am not certain that that's really the case. So perhaps we could go out there and experiment with it. I suppose if you were, say, launching it long term, like you really had to worry about trajectory, curvature of the earth, etc., like that. If your cans were staying airborne long enough, I suppose it's possible that consistency and density inside the can would become important. But I think they fall to earth a lot faster than that can really come into play. But we'll ask some of the physicists on board to see if they can analyze that. Tuna, I think, would be relatively consistent because it's pretty tightly packed throughout. But that flatter disc shape, it would be fine for launching out of a skeet launcher, I suppose, if you're shooting at sporting clays and you happen to have that around, and not the shotgun, which would also be a good weapon. You could launch tuna fish cans out of one of those things and I suppose do some serious damage. But throwing it by hand, I guess, unless maybe they're talking to like sidearm and submarine pitching style Antifa folks. Kent Tekulve apparently has joined and Dan Quisenberry. Are they both still alive? Do we have any other currently active? I don't watch enough baseball to know if there are currently active submarine style pitchers out there. Or I guess there are probably a few sidearm pitchers out there still. Maybe Greg has an idea, or even some suggestions as to why, for instance, Star-Kissed tuna might not be just as good as Bumblebee. But I actually do have a suggestion as to why it would be Bumblebee. Just before we might as well close this segment out, right? Kate Sherrill sends us the tweet from Julia Davis, who digs into all sorts of things, usually Russia's influence over Donald Trump. But this one, I don't know. She's into she's a tuna forensic scientist as well. She says, Trump is so petty. In 2018, Bumblebee, the tuna brand, the real people, not a bumblebee. It wasn't a bumblebee that flew by and did this, but Bumblebee tuna called Trump's tariffs devastating. You remember those tariffs the Chinese are supposedly paying, et cetera, et cetera? Now, this is why he specifically picked Bumblebee as Antifa's alleged weapon of choice. What a strange thing to do. And it would be awfully petty to do. I guess that's the best explanation. Or it's the only tuna brand he can remember. I'm sure he remembers the Sorry Charlie television commercial campaign because he's clearly a heavy TV watcher. But maybe he goes even further back to the old jingle days. Does anybody remember the Bumblebee tuna jingle? Greg, do you remember the Bumblebee tuna jingle? And will you sing it now for us live?
Nah, I was kind of a chicken of the sea kind of guy. Oh,
right. I had forgotten about Chicken of the Sea. Dang. Well, there's a lot of good brands out there, and I hope they're all using dolphin safe and packed in water, low sodium. I would hope for too, if you're really going to,
I saw somebody on Twitter suggest actually, if you're going to throw anything, you should throw a can of beets.
Beets.
Yeah,
because no one likes beets.
Because if you throw tuna and they hit you, at least you have the tuna.
Right.
You can eat that. But if somebody throws a can of beets at you, all you wind up is a black and blue mark and a can of beets.
Right. And that's true. Hardly anybody really enjoys
who wants that?
Beets. Don't throw them at my dad. He likes beets. And also, you'll hurt him if you hit him with the can of beets. But he likes it, so it would be a waste of time. On this show, by the way, we throw Bruce's Yams. I don't know if you're familiar with the can or have seen it on the shelves here, but we're strong, tough, strongly people here.
What about Spam? Like old-fashioned Spam.
Oh, yeah. Square. So you could get hit with a corner. I would think that would be on the list too. By the way, President Tiny Hands throws Underwood deviled ham cans. Those little tiny things. Also, Vienna sausages.
Yeah, good to know.
Yeah.
So
we have them outgunned in
happening,
cans.
by the way.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to do all on cans, but go ahead.
Yeah, you could do that, or spam, But let's see, where should we start? So much going on. The Republicans are going to muscle through a Amy Coney Barrett nomination, I think, and try to get it done before the election. And there's some interesting things to be said about that, so I think we will. But before we get to that, just to round up the news.
Gee, it's all dolphin tuna.
The Democrats in the House of Representatives, along with the Republicans, in a bipartisan fashion, passed stopgap measures so that the government doesn't shut down. So at least that won't happen.
Yes, we hope.
Nobody talked about that because it's not that interesting, but they did it.
Okay.
Right? Just, And, we got polling this morning, a minor, tiny freak out because the ABC Washington Post poll, which I don't know that they've ever polled Florida before, had a RV lead for Biden, but an LV lead for Trump. But about 3 minutes later, two other Florida polls came out and said, no, Biden's still leading. And ABC Washington Post poll also had an RV lead for Biden in Arizona, but a slight Trump lead, just about a tie with their LV screen, which seems to be very tight and is excluding younger people. And then another poll came out and said, no, that's not true either. So it looks like status quo.
Rocky
and if
start
anything, Biden's national poll has actually ticked up a couple of points or two. And the reason that this is relevant is because these polls are starting to come in after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So if there was any question about, how the polls are affecting the presidential race, Gary Langer, the ABC Washington Post pollster, said, whatever the results, we should note for the record that there was no difference pre and post death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in our polling.
Okay.
It's one data point, and then some of these newer polls are actually post incident, passing of RBG. So it doesn't really look like there's going to be a major effect on the presidential race. The key question is going to be is how much is it going to affect the Senate race?
Okay. Yes.
And so, of course, that is unclear at this time, but I will tell you that Senate polls are just out in 3 states. Again, ABC News Washington Post has Kelly up by 5 over Martha McSally in the RV screen and +1 in the LV screen. But Change Research has Kelly up by 8. Change Research also has Gary Peters up by 6 in Michigan, a race we're keeping an eye on, and Cal Cunningham up by 5 in North Carolina over Tom Tillis. So the Democrats continue to be a slight favorite to retake the Senate. Good. The Arizona news is interesting because this morning, starting last night, but this morning, Cindy McCain is hitting all the talk shows saying, I am voting for Joe Biden. He understands what it's like to have a kid actually sent to war. I'm not only voting for him, I'm actively campaigning for him. And Martha McSally, no interest.
Yeah, well, good. And she votes there. So that's
so
one for us.
She's certainly going to be voting, and she's certainly going to be campaigning in Arizona. I'm very curious as to see whether the Biden campaign will use her in South Carolina.
Yeah, that's
because,
true.
Her late husband's best friend, the Weasel, otherwise known as Lindsey Graham, is running in South Carolina. And I just don't know what she's going to do about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. See how.
But she said she's going to be actively campaigning. I don't know what that means.
All right. I mean, she could do something in South Carolina. My mind in South Carolina, and McCain went back to the South Carolina primary against George W. Bush.
About that. Yeah.
But I don't know if anyone remembers that or what bearing that might have on her decision.
As soon as I thought South Carolina. McCain, South Carolina. What association do I have with
That's
McCain
what I
and South
went.
Carolina?
Yeah.
I wonder. Maybe they won't go. I don't know.
We're old. Okay.
Still bad blood there. But
yeah. Bring tuna. I guess.
South Carolina Republican Party is extremely Trumpy, so I don't know what happens there. But in any case, there's, of course, also a couple of national polls that were out this morning. And let's see what we have here. USC Dornsife has Biden up by 10, and Change Research has Biden up by 9. And so the national poll is actually ticked up above 7 again. It's now 7.1 on 538. And so basically we're still looking at a status quo situation despite the chaos of the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Well, I've been wondering about how this would impact things, but then and lots of questions about how it might affect polling, and my only answer for everybody was, I don't think anything affects polling, so not this time.
At this point, really nothing moves it. So that's the background to a lot of this. Now, I think that the focus from the Democratic activists has been on what do we do about the Supreme Court pick that is going to be stolen from us? Can we stop it? And the answer looks like not really, because we don't have the votes. Well, what do you do after? Plenty. The political side says, okay, but actually most of the talk about that's going to happen after the election. What Biden's going to do, and what he has done, is say, oh, the Supreme Court seat has opened. I'm not talking about packing the courts of court reform at this particular point in time, but I will tell you that the Supreme Court really matters because they're going to take your Affordable Care Act health plan away from you. Mm-hmm. And if you don't vote to have some redress, including a Democratic Senate, then you're going to lose everything. And so that's the way he's going to play the Supreme Court thing. And when asked about, well, who's your person to put on the list of who you would recommend, since the American public apparently wants you to be the one to do it, or at least whoever wins, he said, I'm not giving you a list. I'm just giving you some principles, which, again, is a very smart thing. And then he explained why. The Republicans are trying to trap him into doing that, and he's refusing. The Republicans are trying to trap him into, you're the radical, you're the one that wants to change everything, and he's not doing that. And so, he's actually running a very good, reasonable campaign. It's so reasonable, and it's working well enough that the New York Times felt pressure to write a report by Mike Leibowitz about how weird it is that on the campaign trail with Biden, it's really quiet. He's not doing big rallies. They're not doing door-to-door knocking. He's trying to be responsible about the pandemic, which is still going on. And in fact, numbers are going up, and it's not looking good for what happens in the next couple of weeks to months. And he's wearing a mask, and he's doing all these things. And, Trump is mocking him for it, and therefore it's probably not going to work for Biden because it's the New York Times. Now, in that same article, Mark Leibowitz goes on to say, of course, when you ask Biden voters, they think it's great. But, it feels weird to me. And so therefore, I checked with the Trump campaign, and they said it's not going to work. Okay.
They said it wasn't going to work.
Yeah. So therefore, it's not going to work. Because that's the way it works in Washington. Yeah, you ask the Republicans what you think of stuff, and if they say it's a problem, it's a problem. And if they say it's not a problem, then it's not a problem.
Okay. I guess, or it's the opposite.
So it is the opposite, and in fact, Biden is, in fact, doing the responsible thing while Trump is having these huge mega rallies. And should there be a situation like in Tulsa where people get sick from it, it's going to be a big headache for him. And, it's a major issue. But the press just refuses to write about it. It's like because everything is normalized for him. So it's the usual frustration with the press because they have to put everything both sides. And none of this stuff is both sides stuff. This is a good what happened before all of this from Bill Scherr. Yes. I have a little short tweet thing that he does to sum up the background for this, which I think is hugely important. Mm-hmm. He says, if McConnell and the GOP simply held hearings for Merrick Garland, then rejected him on an up and down vote, or as we say, up or down, that's one word, up or down vote, they wouldn't be subjected to hypocrisy charges now. Oh. Why did they bother creating a principle, no nominees in an election year, that they would so quickly abandon? Here's why.
Oh, yes.
Garland's nomination was a nod to the Republican majority. He was long promoted by Orrin Hatch, so the reason Obama sent him over was because he was being, centrist, let's be accommodating.
Good idea.
Garland was 64, widely seen as a moderate. He would have created an ideologically balanced court, and to give Garland the platform of hearings would emphasize all of that to the public. Mm-hmm. So Republicans could still vote no, but they'd have to do so while fighting uphill. That somehow Garland was a sort of activist judge and Obama was playing politics with the court, and Merrick Garland was really a Bernie Sanders radical socialist, and all that sort of stuff.
Yes, of course.
And instead of letting their long-standing narrative get undercut, they shut down the process. So Democrats and Republicans have a long history of being compromising with judges, despite all the friction. The pork fight resulted in Kennedy, not a Democratic pick. Thomas was not filibustered. Hatch recommended Ginsburg. Democrats fought several Bush appellate picks, but compromised on some strongly conservative ones to avoid a Republican nuclear option. It was conservatives that sunk Harriet Miers, not Democrats.
Right.
And as Graham loves to note, he backed Obama's first two picks. So Garland was offered in the same spirit of consensus. But as a replacement for Scalia, adjusting the ideological calibration of the court was untenable for Republicans. So they shut it down. And they shut it down in a way that would mask that spirit. I mean, they were just hiding what they were doing. And this matters because the Republican justification for abandoning their own principle is Democrats would have done it too, and they need folks to think both parties are equivalently partisan, equivalently ruthless, and disinterested in compromise. And so maybe in the future, Democrats will be that way, but that's not recent history. And so he's just pointing out what actually happened. It's like saying, oh, look at Harry Reid. Harry Reid got rid of the filibuster without mentioning why. And of course, Harry Reid was on Twitter yesterday saying that's BS.
Yeah.
We had to because they were blocking everything. So the whole point is that Republicans have been like this all along, but they don't like the public to know it.
Yes.
And so that's the background for how we got here in the first place, which I think is really important. So, oh, well, you started it. When the Republicans say that, it's just garbage, complete garbage.
That, I think, is a very good explanation of things.
So that fits with what you know and remember?
Yes, I keep adding when it comes to the specific point about Harry Reid and his doing what he was doing, is everyone loves to leave out, and it is Twitter, you're limited in your characters, but in an article you could write it. Everyone loves to leave out that the idea of using what became known as the nuclear option was not first proposed, but certainly popularized by the Republicans' threat to do that in 2004 and 2005 when Democrats were blocking their ability to fill the circuit courts with Republican nominees. And this was their idea. And of course, now that we're in this situation now, or people are talking about changing the composition of the court, or when they were reacting to Harry Reid using the same procedure in 2013, well, it's only fair play for you to anticipate Republicans will retaliate. They will do something back to you in kind because that's the way things are somehow supposed to work. But everybody then leaves out the fact that the 2013 use of the nuclear option, not just because, primarily because, of course, so many nominees were being blocked, but also because back in 2004, 2005, when Republicans used the threat of this to get their way, people said, well, there ought to be and probably will be retribution. And that came in 2013, and everybody seems to have forgotten that it had its roots back in 2004, 2005, and it seemed perfectly natural at the time.
Right.
To say that it was coming.
And there's two sides of that coin, right? In order to make the retribution threat realistic,
yes,
you have to use it.
Right.
If you never use it, it doesn't have any point. The other side of the coin, of course, Windsor Mann, who was a conservative, in fact, senior advisor to Project Lincoln, says the closer Republicans get to losing power, the more unabashedly they abuse power, which is why they should lose it.
Yes.
Which I think is true. And so to put all of this in perspective, let's look at none other than John F. Harris from Politico, who's a Republican-leaning, let me explain to you plebes how things really work in Washington type of guy.
Boy, oh boy. Okay.
McConnell is on the losing side of history, and he knows it. His contempt for voters, Senate colleagues, and tradition makes him the avatar of the politics of decline.
Avatar.
And he says, look, there are two possible reasons why it would be rational for him to act on the Supreme Court vacancy in a way that is so damaging to the reputation of the Senate and so contemptuous of half of his Senate colleagues and of American voters.
Okay.
And it's a good summary because that's exactly what's going on. And there's no sugarcoating that. everybody on both sides know that this is a pure power play, and there is no patina to strip off. Patina.
Oh, I see. Okay. I was lost there for a second. Okay.
One
Thank you.
is that he expects his party to hold power for a very long time. Who cares what the opposition thinks when they don't matter now and won't in the future? But the other is that he expects to hold power in a very short time, for a very short time, or at least it's keenly attuned to this possibility and believes that once power is lost, it's gone. Under this scenario, it would make sense to lock in as many gains as quickly as possible for as long as possible. The enduring scorn of the opposition is an acceptable price to pay because the long-term contest is essentially over. Now, which possibility more likely reflects the ruthless rationality of the McConnell mind? The Republican Party sprint to install a justice for a lifetime appointment this year, either days before a presidential election or in the lame duck, looks a lot like the dying spasms of a political movement that began 5 decades ago. McConnell knows the prognosis and is unsentimentally getting the movement's affairs in order. The most important item in the last testament is filling courts with people in position to check liberal ambition long after McConnell's gone. Pursuing this goal so close to Election Day is a reversal of the majority leader's alleged principle in 2016, but it's consistent with his true principle: exploit every advantage of power for as long as his party has it. The Kentucky Republican, in a loveless alliance with Trump, is a skilled practitioner of the politics of decline and for a conservative movement that's in palliative care. It's not a prediction for the November election. It's possible Trump and Senate Republicans get a modest boost, but confident and growing political movements do not act like Senate Republicans under McConnell's leadership are acting. They don't act like that. They know they're losing. That's basically the gist of the article.
That's it's an interesting gist, considering where it's coming from. It was a little confusing at the beginning. Well, is it long-term or is it short-term? And the answer is it could be either one, except, all right, well, so it's the short-term reaction to a long-term plan coming to an end. I'm still not sure which one it is, but okay.
It's over. We have nothing else.
Yeah,
so
all right.
Let's just get this done.
Okay.
And then we're done.
All right, we'll be back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with our exploration of the news and tuna fish marketing reports with Greg Dworkin. Let's see. So we just wrapped up with the I had questions at the end of the piece about McConnell about whether or not the long-term movement he had in mind that was coming to an end was the conservative movement / Reagan Revolution, or just me, McConnell. I'm coming to an end. Okay.
All the above.
All the above. Okay.
But mostly he's talking about the conservative movement.
Okay. Well, he his time overlaps, and I guess McConnell's patio is coming for us all. And all right, so quietly getting his affairs in order.
Right.
It's an interesting perspective of it. Okay.
So a couple of things that also are in the buzz for this morning. Ron Johnson has released his long-awaited by Republicans, but dreaded by Republicans and pretty much ignored by Democrats report on Hunter Biden and Burisma. There's absolutely no new information in it. He looks like a jerk, and he spent at least 10 pages of the 87 some odd pages defending how and why he's using Russian information in his report to try to smear the Bidens.
Well,
and pretty much it's a dud. And that's the reaction from the media. There's nothing here.
All right. So good preview of what we'll get, I guess, with the Durham report as well. That, too, likely to be a dud, and it's out there. We'll see when they decide to move it.
The other one is an interesting report in The Atlantic from Barton Gellman.
Ah, yeah.
Which talks a little bit about the fact Republican sources tell Barton Gellman the Trump campaign is discussing contingency plans to bypass election results and appoint loyal electors in battleground states where Republicans hold a legislative majority. And this coincides with Trump at his rallies saying we need that ninth judge because, election stuff might come up.
Right.
Now, McKay Coppins is summarizing this and says, here's how it would work according to a Trump campaign legal advisor. The Trump campaign legal advisor I spoke with told me, this is the Gellman, told me the push to appoint electors would be framed in terms of protecting the people's will. Once committed to the position that the overtime count had been rigged, state lawmakers will want to judge for themselves what the voters intended. The state legislators will say, all right, we've been given this constitutional power. We don't think the results of our own state are accurate. Here's our slate of electors we think properly reflect the results of the state. Democrats have exposed themselves to this stratagem by creating the conditions for lengthy overtime.
Yes.
When the Atlantic asked the Trump campaign about plans to circumvent the vote and appoint loyal electors, they didn't directly answer the question. It's outrageous President Trump and his team are being villainized for upholding the rule of law.
Which they're not doing. But, yeah, this is a possibility I think we have discussed on the show.
Yeah, it's a worst-case thing, but they're putting some, here's the mechanism by which they would do this.
Yes, that too. I mean, I think this is a good second round of it. I can't recall who wrote the first round discussing it, but we did read about how that power resides with state legislatures generally, but also how the governors who hold the power to certify the results from the state likewise could make a decision about certifying their own slate of electors instead, even if the legislature isn't Republican.
Which is interesting just when you consider that Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan have Democratic governors.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Right. That's right. Oh, yes. It was the one of the wargaming groups that were running scenarios, simulated post-election scenarios that had come up with that one, that it was entirely possible that Democratic governors might be called upon by the Biden campaign to certify their electors instead. So all kinds of fun ideas out there.
North Carolina has a Democratic governor. Florida has a Republican governor, but Florida counts fast.
Yes, that's true.
So I don't know if that really comes into that. Arizona counts slow and has a Republican governor. So that might fit into that sort of scenario. Iowa has a Republican governor who's awful, so you never know.
Well, awful is sometimes what's required in that. Okay.
So that's all there in the background. Am I really particularly worried about that? I note it. I'm sure that it's more than just paranoia that the Trump campaign is thinking about this. And the reason they're thinking about this is because they're losing. And the obvious play is have Republicans vote on Election Day, have the Democrats vote by mail. Republicans appear to be ahead, declare victory.
Right.
And then the actual counts come in, and it turns out they lose. And we saw that play out in 2018 in the sense that the size of the Democratic victory wasn't obvious on Election night.
Yes.
And it looked like, okay, well, Democrats take the House. And then a week later, oh, my God, they took the House by like a lot.
Yeah.
But it took a week.
Right.
And so you didn't get the Democrats' landslide win in House on Election night.
Yeah, and even though it comes later, people are not looking out for it. It's not the banner headline. Right. But yeah, they absolutely did. Republicans absolutely did allege all sorts of fraud in that. I recall that there were, in particular, a couple of California Republican candidates who looked like they had narrow victories in hand and then had those victories overturned. And they, of course, insisted that this was all shenanigans and ballot box stuffing on the part of Democratic operatives somewhere in the shadows, armed with tuna cans, I'm sure.
And, of course, we have pardoned Roger Stone saying, well, of course this is what we're going to do. This is exactly the plan. So, I mean, there's a lot of subtext out there with Republicans telling us that this is what they would like to do, which is not the same thing as they're going to do it. But it's out there.
Yeah. Now I remember where I came from. We were looking at this Jeffrey Skelly piece in 538 last week. Was holding this out as a possibility. So, all right, it's out there. People have tuna. You never know what's going to happen.
Right. What else is going on? It turns out that not just Trump, who does this to Biden all the time, but now the Senate Republicans are starting to manipulate video and changing what their opponents appear to be saying.
That's just fine.
Which is, of course, not just fine, but it just seems to be a Republican campaign tactic now accepted by the Republican Party that this is okay to do.
Yeah, not fringe players, but Senate candidates.
Right.
Oh, well, what did they change this time? Was this...
This is, let's see, John Ossoff supports defunding police, except he never really said that.
Oh, well, all right then.
Right. So, and that's interesting because latest polls actually have Ossoff and Perdue in like a 1-point race either way. There's actually one that has Ossoff in the lead. And as a matter of fact, since we mentioned it, why don't we just take a look at the Senate polling? Because there's always something.
Yeah,
so what do we have today? We have Change Research. Cal Cunningham, again, 5-point lead. I think we mentioned at the start of the show. Change Research. Gary Peters, a 6-point lead. Arizona, Kelly, 8-point lead, which matches the ABC News Arizona Kelly 5-point lead. We did this in the first part of the segment, but I think it's just important to put this in perspective. We also have Cal Cunningham with a 6-point lead yesterday in North Carolina from Harper Polling. And we had Ossoff and Perdue, University of Georgia yesterday, had Perdue only up by 2 points. Which I think is interesting. And on the same day, Morning Consult, Georgia polled yesterday, had Ossoff up by 1 point. So I just wanted to make the connection there that when we're talking about David Perdue and Ossoff's Senate race in Georgia, it's very close.
All right. Do vote.
Okay. And then if we're going to do Georgia, let's do the presidential race there, general election in Georgia. And what we have is University of Georgia yesterday, exactly even tied race. GBAO from Georgia on the 21st had Biden up by 3. Redfield and Wilton had Trump up by 1 on the 20th. And on the 15th, Harris X had Biden up by 6. On the 10th, Fabricio Ward Hart Research Associates joint poll had Biden up by 1. So Georgia remains a very close race. Latest quality poll is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution yesterday. That's the University of Georgia poll that had it tied. And at 11 o'clock or so today, 11:12, you never really know exactly, Monmouth should have their latest Georgia poll out. And they last polled in the field in July. And in their July poll, remember this is the pollster that does low turnout and high turnout versions. In the high turnout version, Trump was up by 1, and in the low turnout version, it's not going to be low turnout, folks, Trump was up by 3.
Okay.
So that's the July version, and then we'll see where we're at late this morning, before noon. And
do an 11 o'clock version and a 12 o'clock version.
Yeah,
so
well,
that's good.
Exactly. Well, depends where you are, right?
Yeah, well, that's true, too.
Chicago
just
or...
one of them doesn't show up, that's all.
Or New York, so we'll see.
Right.
But, don't freak out over the ABC Washington Post state polls. It's the first time they've done those states. There's some hinky things about it. Just throw it on the pile. Don't ignore them because Gary Langer is a very good pollster. But there's reasons to look at it and scratch your head and say, I don't know about this.
They do a chocolate version and a peanut butter version on that side. Okay.
So,
old commercials are the theme of the day.
For the most part.
Okay. Well, good. That's all I want to do then.
Okay, good. You can stop.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea. What can I eat for breakfast that's in a can? Is there any canned breakfast goods?
Interesting piece here from BuzzFeed. No minute of silence, no plans for a memorial to be erected in their honor, no collective grieving for the 200,000 deaths.
No.
And BuzzFeed News, if you actually recognize the horrific toll this is taking, one history professor told BuzzFeed News, you're acknowledging the weight of the problem and the failure of the response.
We should do that.
Why we should, but that's why you don't see a lot from the Trump administration.
No, well, they don't. Also, they don't care. But yeah, that's true. In fact, the first thing I noticed when I opened up Twitter this morning was the story in the Texas Tribune. Ted Cruz blocks a U.S. Senate resolution to honor Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, and he did that because it mentioned her dying wish.
Yes.
And he thought that was partisan.
Right. And it's not. And
he's just reminding everybody why nobody likes Ted Cruz.
That
nobody
is
likes
true.
Mitch McConnell. I mean, they're really loathsome people.
They are.
But to their way of thinking,
But
that's not the point. We can, so we will.
They
and that's
enjoy
basically the philosophy.
Right. So, of course, he would do that. He has no worries about being the most hated person in the Senate. Doesn't change his mind about anything. And he has an enormous collection of canned soup. I just thought I would bring it around to that again.
Right. The other thing that I wanted to do is throw in...
Soup. Tuna.
No, I'm not
Beets.
throwing any cans at you. This
Oatmeal.
is CNN. It looks like can, but it's an N there. It's CNN, not can.
Oh.
And this is a
That's
piece
the French
colleges
Film
knew the
Festival,
risks,
yes.
but they reopened anyway, and here's how they got it all wrong.
No.
And what's happening is that those colleges are actually fueling the resurgence of COVID-19 in your community.
Mine. And they're not even community
everywhere,
colleges.
all over the country. Wisconsin's having a major outbreak right now. It's interesting, by the way, that
Yes,
Wisconsin
that I've
is doing better for Biden and more poorly for Trump than Pennsylvania. Wisconsin has a much bigger outbreak than Pennsylvania. People may be
Pennsylvania has
mad
more
at the
schools.
governor of Pennsylvania for clamping down pretty harshly, but it turns out it's working.
Oh, well, yeah, a lot of the states that have been very strict are, doing relatively well compared to their neighbors. And gee whiz, I wonder why that might be. Every time I map out the top 10 in terms of new cases daily, Minnesota is surrounded on all sides by states that are consistently in the top 10 and for the most part have stayed off of that list somehow. And I'm not really sure how that could be other than the slightly tighter controls and more serious approach that Minnesota has taken from the top than all of their neighbors.
Right. So, there's an axiom in politics that you never get rewarded, you only get blamed. So you have this paradox where if things are not going well with coronavirus, then you look and say, well, it's Trump's fault.
I do.
But if things are going well with coronavirus,
Yes.
then you say, well, it's really not an issue. I think I'll vote on economic anxiety.
Okay.
So if you're ignoring Trump and doing the opposite of what he says and you do well, it benefits him.
I don't even know how to score
It's
that.
weird. I mean,
Yeah.
but people really sometimes have to step back and look at the totality of what's going on. Even if things are, quote, going well, unquote, your life has been disrupted and it's never going to be the same.
Yeah, that's true. Standing around saying, look how well my state is doing in a mask inside my house.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I can't go out. Let's go out to a restaurant. Let's go out to a bar and have a drink. You can't.
Right.
So it's all going to filter in. And I think that, for some people, it just takes a lot to really, gel. Everything just sort of has to come together.
Yes.
Things need to get locked in. And that's important because, by the way, people are, in fact, voting even as we speak, especially in places like North Carolina.
Not me. I'm here. Yes, but I could be voting, and I guess I will, but it'll just have to be after 11 o'clock one of these days.
You're going to vote early in person?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I ought to take care of that. I originally thought about, I'll just vote on regular election day. But just in terms of, I didn't really think there would be a huge problem doing that in my neighborhood, and there probably won't be. I don't know. I'm starting to think like, I don't know, maybe a safe will fall on me or something. I better get my vote cast.
You never know.
There's a pandemic that's killing people.
Or
Maybe I
martial law
should.
might be declared and they won't let you vote.
Yeah,
So maybe you better
so-
get out there.
It's entirely possible. It's starting to make me think that maybe I ought to take advantage. I think in early October they will open an early voting station polling place much closer to me. Right now you have to kind of go to the county seat. And as you've seen probably in pictures on Twitter, they're
Lines
in
are
like
long.
day 5 or so or more of the voting, and the lines are still like they were on day 1. So it doesn't seem to
That's
be
why
letting
I'm
up.
saying it's going to be a high turnout election. You can forget the
Yes.
low turnout model that you hear from Monmouth.
Yeah. Well, they feel like they have to do it.
They have
So,
to do it. It's
fine.
interesting, but don't worry about it.
Okay, I don't. So maybe I will in early
So in
October.
early
turn in my
October, you
ballot.
get a early in-person vote available closer to your home.
Yes. So I
In
imagine
early
that will
October, I get
help.
the.
Yes.
I have to tell you a funny story about voting.
All right.
In early October, I've dropped off my absentee ballot application, and I should get my ballot mailed to me on October 2nd or thereabouts. And when it arrives in the mail, whenever that is, then I fill it out and then I bring it and drop it off in person at my town clerk. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if you remember, but I sent you a picture of what the town clerk's office looks like.
Yes.
It's in an oldish building, and there's a window that faces the parking lot.
Did I get the picture?
And there's a big sign on the door that says Dropbox, pointing to the left. And in the window to the left is a cardboard box that has on it written in Sharpie, Dropbox.
Uh-huh.
And a little cutout flap from the cardboard box.
Did Wile
And so you
Coyote
take your
write
ballot
this?
or your tax assessment or whatever it is that you're trying to drop off with the clerk, and you put it in the cardboard box, and that's your drop-off. And because it's a small town, because they don't want you in the building. They really would like you to not have that much contact so that nobody gets sick.
Right.
Because it's a small town, you can actually stick your head in the slot and yell, "Hello, I'm dropping off." And somebody will say, "Okay."
Gotcha.
And then they come and they get it.
Put your mask back on.
Right. So, you're wearing your mask the entire time you do this. So,
there's like,
the day that the application was mailed to me,
yes,
unlike you, who was a sloth,
right,
the day I got it, right, I filled it out.
Right. Yes, right. You did good.
And the next day, I went to, bring it, and I was looking for one of those, post office box, mailbox looking things. That's a standalone metal thing that looks like a mailbox.
Right.
And they didn't have one. They just had this cardboard thing.
Tissue box.
Yeah. So I threw it in there and said, "Hello, I'm dropping off," and they said, "Okay." And then
they came by
the next day,
the
local paper, the Newtown Bee, comes out.
Man yells in window.
With explanations of how you're supposed to vote. And they have a picture of these metal drop boxes standing in front of the town clerk, which they didn't have the day I was there.
Yeah.
They just installed them the next day, and then they ran with the story.
Yeah.
So this was a Friday. I get the Friday paper. I read this. Saturday, Sunday, the town clerk's closed.
I would lose my mind.
And I said, "Look, I think I dropped it off properly, but I'm going to call the town clerk just to see what's going on here."
Yeah.
Right? So I called the clerk, and the clerk has this, Hello, government
Bob.
officials. They don't know who's calling and what kind of crank call it's going to be. So they're very neutral, shall we say. Very professional.
Okay.
When they answer the phone. Town clerk's office.
Right.
I said, "Hi, listen, I have a voting application question for you." And you can hear take a deep breath. Okay, what is it?
Yeah.
So, well, here's what happened. I came and I got my ballot and I dropped it off, and there was no standalone thing, and so I stuck it in the cardboard box in the window. And then the next day, I read in the local paper, the Newtown Bee, that you now have the metal boxes. And is everything okay? Did I do it wrong? Do I have to redo it? What's going on? And the clerk just burst out laughing. She said, "Don't worry about it. You did everything fine. Everybody's dropping it off in the cardboard box, and nobody's using the damn thing."
Oh, okay. So the metal box is out there, and everyone's ignoring it.
Exactly.
I know the genuine
because it's it's a small town. It's Newtown. We're just you used to doing it that way.
Right.
If you want to drop off your taxes, everybody's using the little cardboard box, which is looks totally insecure, but the other end of it is actually their office. So
I guess that's good. Anybody putting anything else in the metal box? Mail?
I don't know.
Shoes?
Can't tell.
No,
Right? You
it's
think
metal. You can't
clothes
see. That's
for
right.
Salvation Army?
Yeah,
don't know.
they have those too. I don't know what people are putting in there. Tuna.
But just it gives you an idea of the fact that when you're doing mail-in for the very first time,
This is
there's
gonna
some
become a
quirks
story,
and some things you have to work out to make sure it works.
Right. So look out for this on November 4th when Trump says, "Did you know that in a town in Connecticut, also California, and every state in the union, they're using cardboard boxes, not even secure. I heard this.
Yeah, these places
25 million
they also
places
live in those
did this.
boxes because they have no homes, but they're also using them as drop boxes for your
Right. These losers and suckers are using. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I'm glad you called because I wanted to know the resolution of that thing. I just like I you were saying it originally, and I was like, did Wile E. Coyote put this thing together? Free bird seed. Put your ballot here. Really?
It works. It's Rube Goldberg, but it works for them, and they're perfectly happy with it.
It's just local election styles. Very interesting.
Right.
So,
but that's Newtown, Connecticut. Now, the bigger issue, as Dave Wasserman has pointed out, is in Pennsylvania with the so-called naked ballots.
Yes.
2020's hanging chad. So what happens in Pennsylvania is you have to make sure that you put the envelope into a special envelope.
Yes, they give
and if you don't do that, it's a naked ballot. And whereas they counted in the primary the GOP has gotten the court in Pennsylvania to agree that it won't count in the general election. So in other words, you have to fill out your ballot exactly right.
Very important. True.
Follow all of the instructions or it'll be invalidated. And I don't think Pennsylvania is like North Carolina. In North Carolina, if you didn't have a proper signature on the outside ballot envelope, it would be invalidated, but they'd contact you and you would have time to go ahead and fix it. I don't know that that's going to happen in Pennsylvania. On the other hand, Pennsylvania extended the time frame for when the ballots would be accepted, right up until Election Day, and then they'll still count them after that. So there's a lot going on in Pennsylvania, and they're doing this for the first time. So if you live in Pennsylvania, you need to be very, very careful about how you do it. And I'm told that the Biden campaign is actually putting some bucks into voter education so that people know how to fill these ballots out. Back in North Carolina, we still have a really big lead for Democrats in the vote by mail, absentee by mail counting that's going on right now. But there's relatively few ballots that are being invalidated.
That's
and, there's just as many Republican as Democratic ballots in that category that are being invalidated. But there's a much bigger Democratic response, which is way beyond what it normally is. In a normal year in North Carolina, 20% of the vote comes with absentee by mail. Another 38 comes with early in person, which hasn't started yet. And then the rest comes on Election Day. And I don't know what the numbers are going to be this year. I would think it's more skewed toward the absentee. But the point being that more than 50% of the vote is not on Election Day. And so, in a lot of states, a lot of the voting is already going to be happening by November 3rd.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind when you're looking to see how big the debates next week change everything, because they probably won't.
Right. Well, some large percentage of the vote will already be in. And, of course, debates don't change much at all, ever, really. So.
Right. I saw a story in Politico that the Trump campaign is kicking itself.
Good. I'll kick them.
In fact, here's the lead story in Politico today. Trump falls into the trap he set for Biden. Talking about Wile E. Coyote.
That's the story. Don't tell me.
I can't tell. I have to
more.
read the story here.
Where is
apparently what happened is that he crawled into this cardboard box that was sitting in the window of his town clerk's, and now he's stuck.
Free ice cream.
Something like that, right?
Here's what we did.
Hamburgers. We
painted
have hamburgers here. Just climb in the box and you can take them.
Yes, I painted an airport runway on the side of a cliff, and he insisted that Air Force One fly and land there. And that was the end of Trump. Wow.
I'm trying to tell this story and not laugh, so stop, okay? Trump falls into the trap he set for Biden. The president spent months mocking Joe Biden's acumen, lowering expectations for the Democratic nominee in the first presidential debate. And as a result, some on Trump's team now worry about a loss next week.
All right. So
because he's not taking them seriously.
Jason
and all
Miller
he's doing
wins.
is going out and having fun at his rallies, and he's not doing the homework, which is, of course, what he normally does.
Right.
White House allies, Republican donors, and some of Trump's closest advisors worry that a recent frenzied push by his top lieutenants to portray Biden as a seasoned debater is too late. I think we talked about that. Jason Miller is the only one who was doing that. And we mentioned it at the time. But it's too late now, and it's too disingenuous to have an impact when the two meet in the debate stage next Tuesday.
Cool.
They worry Trump has set a trap for himself by incessantly attacking Biden's age and mental acumen, and by the way, and also manipulating videos. Yes. And then say the only reason he can perform well at town halls is because he's on drugs. They've done all of those things. It's a tactic the president has maintained even as his campaign publicly insists the former vice president is fully capable of a satisfactory performance.
Okay. I'm not certain what that means.
Right. Unlike the president, who spuriously claimed Biden is probably on performance-enhancing drugs, or PEDs, PEDs.
Yes.
Trump campaign communications director Tim Murtaugh attributed Biden's quite good performance in past debates to the Democrats' ability to turn it on when the cameras come after years of experience in politics. Well, that's not going to work.
Nor is it unusual.
Right.
Okay.
Several Trump allies pointed to Biden's sharp debate earlier this year against Bernie Sanders, et cetera, et cetera. And while they don't expect Biden to maintain a strong posture for the entire 90 minutes, they acknowledge it'll take only a couple of stinging sound bites and memorable zingers to surpass the bar Trump has set for him. So it's a whole article about the debates, which in fact never change any minds, and it's kind of dumb. But, the whole Trump campaign is kind of dumb. And it's just interesting to see how, we could do this, we can do this, we can do this. And then the day comes and say, well, we can't get away with this.
Help, our strategy.
Help,
That's
dog
amazing.
ate my homework. Don't worry about it. I'll just
headline.
tell the teacher the dog ate my homework. And you go there and there's a big sign saying, dog ate my homework is unacceptable. And you go, oh my,
it's
what do we
so
do now?
cartoonish. The headline just evokes so many thoughts of him.
I know. I'll paint the runway on the wall.
Right.
The Air Force One will land right in the teacher's,
Amazing. So I just keep thinking of him like getting caught in his own bear trap and running away with like the pants ripped and spotted boxer shorts showing through in the middle. Or
I keep thinking
falling
Winnie
into
the
a mud
Pooh was
puddle.
stuck in the wall and stooped back to get out.
That's probably.
And he tried to climb into the box to get my ballot, and now he's stuck. And the only way he's going to get out is to go on a diet for 6 months.
Stuck between columns in the White House portico, trying to get into the Rose Garden. Help! Amazing. Well, that's an image for you, falling into his own trap.
Yes,
Good.
I'm not fat shaming. I'm just saying Winnie the Pooh was a beloved figure, and it was a wonderful,
There's no
wonderful
shame in
cartoon.
that, and everyone loves honey. So, as understood. Okay, that's a good escape from that.
Anyway,
better
it's his
than
own
Winnie's.
trap. It's of his own making, and I
Winnie
really
Bear
think that
called
if he happened to pass by my town clerk, he would try to climb in the window and take my ballot.
Absolutely.
I just don't have any doubts about that.
That's illegal ballot.
And
Let
by
me
the
have
way,
that back.
he'd get stuck.
Yeah,
It's a really small window.
I guess so. But at least it's cardboard and easy to rescue him from, as opposed to if we find him stuck with his legs sticking out of a metal box somewhere, we know what happened.
Right, exactly right. So
Okay.
that's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow.
Man,
We'll
good.
do more. I thought I was done at like 9:35.
I know.
This stuff just writes itself.
It really does, and I'm glad for the extra time and the comic relief. I appreciate it. Thanks, Greg. We'll see you tomorrow, and see what children's book Trump turns into then. All right, we'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg ducked out at the last possible second there. Things were going so well, we just decided to continue the conversation, and then he realized, I think probably not only, hey, I have to go, I have things to do, I have a life outside of the show, whatever sort of excuse you might make up. It struck him that if I'm still here when the show comes back on, do I have to say anything? Do I have to keep going? I'm out of material. But I'm very much grateful for the last, half hour of additional stuff. This is great, and I wish, I don't know if I would have caught this one. I love this headline. Trump falls into the trap he sets for Biden. I love the idea of Trump falling, for one thing, but I usually have him falling into a well, occasionally into a wood chipper, down the stairs of Air Force One. This was easier to laugh at, all of this. The idea of him being stuck in the cardboard box, which, I guess that's metaphorical in a way too. Not being able to fight his way out of a paper bag, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see. A couple of other comments I just wanted to add to the mix here. Let's see. Well, first of all, a while back around when Greg said, okay, I'm done and I'm ready to leave, Mike Musson commented to us via the Twitter inputs. Can we talk about the paradox inherent with the weak and dumb Trump being the one that might get the help of GOP politicians everywhere to attempt to steal an election? And the answer is no. We can't do that. So there you go. That's the close of that segment. I guess we could talk about it. It is very interesting, though. It's a good point. If I understand where you're going with this one correctly, it is kind of ironic that pushing things like this to the max and taking maximally aggressive strategy nationwide to try to overturn the results of an election, it would seem like it needs some sort of really strong hand directing things from election headquarters central here. But all they've got is Trump, although I suppose at some level it might work as a firm hand, except like maybe in a backhanded sort of way. Like if you don't want the boss to have a tantrum and blame you and take out all his anger on you, you better do this thing. And that's, I guess, all it takes to be a strong leader in this scenario. And of course, now ordinarily people would say, I need to follow orders here because the boss has a plan and he knows what he's doing. And if we screw it up with so much at stake, he'll be furious with us and come after us. But I guess the effect is the same if everyone thinks, all right, if we screw it up, he'll be furious and he'll come after us. But there's no centralized plan. It's just, I'm just a toddler and I want to win. And if I don't win, then there must be something wrong and you need to go in there and do something to stop it and make people think something other than what actually happened. And that's all there is to it. I don't know. Maybe there's more to it in your mind, Mike, and certainly if you want to add to that and round out your scenario or your thoughts a little bit if we didn't reflect them correctly, so you feel free and do that. Chime in. We'll see if we can include things. Other things that Greg's discussion reminded me of as we we made our way through the difficulties with absentee ballots and ballot spoilage and the new term of naked ballots getting thrown out there as well. And he also, I guess he mentioned the differences between what it's becoming a Pennsylvania law is with respect to handling of mail-in ballots and North Carolina's mail-in and absentee balloting. I was reminded, as he was saying, North Carolina didn't appear to have the same, if not the same requirements, then at least not the same, indifference toward ballots that are in some way insufficient and insecure or in whatever form. They haven't followed all of the rules, and that North Carolina might give you an opportunity to correct that, whereas it's unclear whether Pennsylvania will. And I think in some cases Pennsylvania will, but in some cases they'll be overwhelmed by volume and just simply won't be able to, as a matter of logistics, tell enough people that their ballots require correcting. Of course, North Carolina is also famous among Republicans for ballot harvesting, which is still and always was illegal there, but was apparently just a long-standing practice to which authorities in Republican counties in North Carolina turned a blind eye because it benefited Republicans. And it wasn't until there was a fight between Republicans in a primary election and one of the victims of this practice was, in fact, a Republican himself, is how this came to light. And then we found out that there were Republican operatives who have been collecting ballots from people, completed, not completed, signed, not signed, sealed in an envelope, not sealed in an envelope, what have you. And in addition to that, I guess they'll also, allegedly, they have the ability to help people out who have completed their ballots, or the packaging for the ballots anyway, in incomplete fashion, and have them come and remedy it. And I wonder whether that gets done on a partisan basis as well. There's nothing on the outside of the ballot that would necessarily tip people off about what's inside, I guess, but who knows? In small towns where everybody knows everybody, I guess it's possible to wade through the volume and be able to tell with some certainty who you're dealing with. And I guess they must have something on it, must identify it on the outside. It won't tell you what the vote is on the inside. But if you have a familiarity with the voting rolls and who's registered how, then when you see that Joe Smith's ballot has come in and it doesn't have a signature on the signature line of the envelope, and you know he's a strong Republican, you can give him a call and have him correct his ballot, whereas someone else known to you as a strong Democrat you might not call. I don't know how even-handed the practice is in North Carolina. But at any rate, I just remember that one, and remember that there was a contested congressional election that hinged on that, and that the stories coming out of that district were pretty wild about what they let people get away with for years on harvesting those mail-in and absentee ballots. There's also a story circulating that's somewhat alarming. But first, I guess what I'll do is I'll say the general story is this. If you are planning to vote by mail or absentee or whatever they call it in your state, whether you are mailing the ballot back, dropping it off in person, whatever, if you are doing anything other than casting your ballot at a polling station where they will, where nothing special is required, right? Either you put your vote in a Scantron machine if you're used to that, or cast it on a voting machine, or whatever they do, wherever you are. If you are submitting some sort of written record to record your vote in something other than a live election day balloting situation or early voting situation, you will need to keep a sharp eye on the rules as written for submitting your ballot, and then keep a sharp eye on how the local judges in the election end up dealing with these things. Basically, this is a nightmare for most people who aren't political junkies, but election day, your vote isn't finished once you submit this thing. You're going to have to pay attention to any contested election counts in your area and keep on top of how decisions are being made about which ballots are spoiled and which ballots will be counted. And make yourself aware, make yourself check and see whether any of the local elections officials or the party representatives or the attorneys for the candidates are trying to reach out to people who submitted ballots this way, who think that their ballots may have been spoiled. And if they're calling for you to contact them, make sure that you do. Because a lot of times when these things come down to, either it's recounts or contests over submitted ballots, the various campaigns and their lawyers are fighting about what they think that the voter's intent was. Or, for instance, if you think you followed the directions, but the elections judges are throwing out all sorts of ballots and saying, yeah, people signed on the left when they were supposed to sign on the right, but your recollection is, hey, the instructions said that we were supposed to sign on the left, and state law says you're supposed to sign on the right, but the instructions we got erroneously said sign on the left. You need to speak up and contact those elections attorneys and tell them, look, I still have and maybe you want to do this, save the instructions. And say, look, I remember very clearly that it said sign on the left. Now I learned that state law says I have to sign on the right, but the instructions definitely said left, and I have them here to prove it. And you can hand that over to those elections lawyers, and they'll say, make their best case to the judges. If the judge is a lunatic and Trump appointed him or whatever, you may find that they say, it doesn't matter. State law says on the right that the fact that the instructions said left, all the voters were free to Google what the law said, and they didn't do it, and it's their fault, and the ballot is therefore invalid. If you have a regular person judge, you say, well, people definitely thought in good faith that they were complying with the law based on the assertions in the instructions issued to them by the Board of Elections, and we're going to have to accept those things. And besides which, the side of the ballot or side of the envelope on which the signature appears can't have anything to do with influencing the content of the vote. So we're going to count those votes. You have campaign elections law cases like that all the time. You'd be surprised how often that happens. So follow the instructions closely. We have a son away at college for whom we had to send in an absentee ballot application. We were a little worried about doing it too, and delayed a little while, basically for fear that we would send in the absentee ballot application. The town clerk would get it early and fulfill it early and send an absentee ballot to him at his campus mailbox, during which time everyone on campus would come down with COVID. They would shut down the campus and send everybody home for virtual classes, and he would arrive back home only to have his absentee ballot sitting in a mailbox 3 hours away that he could not access because the campus was closed. And then we would have to wonder, what do we do with that? And go to the town clerk and stand around and get more COVID, standing around waiting there for an answer. What do we do about the fact that you've marked us down as an absentee voter, sent us the ballot, and I don't have the ballot to return to you? but I assure you it's locked away in a voting, or rather in a mailbox down, in the southern part of the state. We can't get to it. The campus is closed. Will you give us another ballot, or can you vote on election day, or what? And who knows what the outcome of that is going to be, depending on A, what the rules really are, and B, who's interpreting the rules and whether or not that person is going to be fair-minded or partisan. We don't know. So anyway, the point is, if you're contemplating doing this, follow the instructions to the letter, save the instructions, take a picture of the instructions, whatever it is. Maybe that's the best thing to do, right? If it ever comes to it and the elections lawyers are saying we need a copy of these instructions, how it could be that they wouldn't be able to get a hold of a copy, I don't know. But anyway, if the call goes out and they want it, if you have a picture of it, you text it to them or email it to them that much faster than mailing it to them, and who knows what happens with the mail at that point anyway. I guess that's a good idea too. But follow those instructions closely. A lot of them don't appear to make any sense. But usually, in most cases, there's a rule behind it somewhere. Somebody screwed up something somewhere in a very unique way, and they thought that the way around that problem was to require this weird thing from you when you mail it back. As weird as it may seem, go ahead and do it. And if you have kids in college who are expecting absentee ballots, you should probably get in touch with them and talk to them about this situation and how sometimes those ballot requirements are a little weird and tricky, and you should be careful, and maybe you want to go over it with somebody at home or whatever. But you want to definitely be careful about filling those things out and doing it correctly. There was a story. Now, I guess with that out there, I can share this strange story that I saw early this morning, and I thought, well, this is rather exciting. Comes from a verified type person, a reporter for the AP, in fact, based in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, John Gambrell, who sends this tweet out in his tweet thread, in fact, starting with the all caps shouting admonition. If you are a U.S. citizen planning to vote via the consulate in Dubai, and apparently this may apply elsewhere, or may not. This is what makes this so disconcerting. But if you're planning to vote via the consulate in Dubai, please note all envelopes you use to mail your ballot must be open for inspection, the exact opposite of what the instructions say. That's what's so amazing. So the instructions may go out the window at some point. We'll explore in just a minute why that is. By the way, if you are a U.S. citizen planning to vote via the consulate in Istanbul, I would be very careful about that. I guess it wasn't that where of course that was in the Saudi consulate where Jamal Khashoggi was murdered. So be careful about anybody's consulate. But I think in American consulates, for the most part, you're going to be relatively safe, even though they're probably at least partially full of Trumpsters, depending on where you are. But here is a situation where all of a sudden the rules are changing. This is one of the dangers we face in dealing with things with a corrupt administration like this one. So again, if you're a U.S. citizen planning to vote, he says, via the consulate in Dubai, please note all envelopes to mail your ballot must be open for inspection. Here's the why of it is in here in the story. That is, as he points out, despite state requirements, the state you're voting in, state requirements for envelope sealing, and whatever concern you may have about others seeing your ballot. Of course, your ballots are supposed to be sealed in an envelope for several reasons. One, of course, to keep it secret, which you're entitled to do, generally speaking. And two, to avoid anyone else tampering with your ballot. You're supposed to seal it and seal it in a specific way, usually, very often, with your signature on a part of the ballot that would be destroyed if it were opened and tampered with, so that your ballot can't be handed over to an elections official who knows that you're usually a strong Democratic voter. He's a Republican. He opens up your ballot and scratches out your vote and puts in a vote for a Republican, which ordinarily would result in a spoiled ballot. upon inspection, but it's hell. Yeah, give it a shot anyway. So who cares? At worst, we spoil your vote for the guy he's opposing. And so there were times when tampering like that would go on. And the fix for it is, well, you got to mail it in a sealed, signed envelope. That's been the rule for some time. Gambrell continues on here, explaining, I've been an overseas U.S. voter for over a decade now in several countries. Typically, I receive a packet by email from my county board of elections. I print and fill out the ballot, seal it with affidavits, and drop it off at the nearest U.S. diplomatic post. By the way, expect Trump Republicans to attack even this well-accepted general practice. You receive your packet by email, you print out the ballot, and fill it out and mail it back. And I'm sure Trump voters and QAnon believers will say, you just print out your own ballot on your own printer? You mean anybody could fake one of these things up? How many of them did you print? Maybe you printed it 15 times and you put a different name on each one. Well, it doesn't really work that way. But those are the sorts of accusations they'll be making. Look out for them. I guarantee you that will be happening. But again, Gambrell's story here. He's been a voter overseas for a decade, done it in a lot of different countries. It comes by email. You print it out, you seal it, and drop it off at the nearest U.S. diplomatic post. This morning, he says, I went to the U.S. consulate in Dubai. The G4S private security guards there, I don't know what G4S is, but the private security guards outside of the U.S. consulate in Dubai refused to take my ballot, saying it needed to be open. I showed them how I need to have a signed affidavit on the mailing envelope confirming that I sealed it and followed instructions, right? He brought the instructions with him like I'm telling you to do. Keep them, hold on to them, photograph them so that you can prove, oh, look, you say it needs to be done this way. I say my instructions tell me I have to do it that way. Well, the G4S guards were kind and helpful as they could be, and that's nice. But they said it was their orders. Now, I volunteered to have the envelope scrubbed for nitrates and x-rayed. Why? Of course, what we're talking about here at this point is there's now a scare on that will be right back where we were at one point with possibility of terrorist attacks, that people could be mailing anthrax or ricin, which apparently recently happened. Somebody mailed an envelope addressed directly to the president that had ricin in it and whatever. I don't even know where that came from or why it was done, but you recall those days that we're not so far removed from when that was a problem, or that some sort of explosive or whatever could possibly be in this thing. So he says, look, I will have it scrubbed for nitrates and x-rayed so you can be sure that there's no security problem with the contents. And in fact, they swiped it twice for nitrates, but then came out and said, I still would need to open the envelope. Now, by this point, another overseas U.S. voter casting a Maryland ballot showed up. They told her, too, she'd need to open her envelope for inspection or use one of their envelopes. She told me she'd been voting for 20 years from the UAE and had never had this happen. As a Maryland voter, she could reseal her ballot and use the consulate's generic mailing envelope. As an Ohio voter, I need to have a sealed mailing envelope affidavit, as well as a sealed inner envelope with a separate affidavit identifying myself as the voter at risk of perjury. So some states are real tough on their requirements. Others have different but also tough requirements. And they can't always accommodate the instructions that each state have given to people. At this point, he continues on, a U.S. consular official spoke to me by telephone from the guard post. He said concerns over white powder attacks require them to have all envelopes open before being collected. I explained my concern over Ohio voter rules and keeping my ballot secret. The guards asked me to wait outside for another official. A U.S. consular official later came, and we had a discussion over the rules and my concerns. But by the way, imagine somebody who doesn't have as much time or understanding of the process as John Gambrell does. Luckily, he gets to do a story about it, and he's on the job here. We agreed at that point that I'd come back tomorrow with tape, a pen, and my unassembled envelopes that I'd construct under his watch. I'm lucky enough to have a job that grants me the time to vote as well as time to return again to the consulate tomorrow. If I lived in another emirate or had a job that didn't allow for this, that would have affected my ability to cast my ballot. The U.S. official says these open envelope rules now allow the consulate to take ballots 24 hours a day, as opposed to just during business hours, which I'm not certain I understand, but I guess they say if you're bringing it open and, you are assembling it in front of them so that they know there's no dirty tricks going on, not voter dirty tricks, but no white powders, no explosives, whatever being spirited in and sealed in these envelopes, then I guess I guess that's something I don't know why they roped themselves into saying they could do it 24 hours a day. That means if somebody comes at 3 a.m., a consular official will come out and look and watch this thing specially. That's kind of crazy. But I guess when it was just, hey, drop this thing in a box, they figured, all right, well, we'll only have that during limited hours because then we can have guards on the box and we can make sure that no one is dropping anything that looks obviously like explosives into the box. I don't know if they're really going to make themselves available 24 hours a day, but I get the idea now that I think about it. So they said these open envelope rules allow the consulate to take ballots 24 hours a day as opposed to just during business hours. I suggested they needed to do more to outreach to American voters about this change, as I wasn't the only one tripped up by this. That's true. They probably do need to do that. Do they have the budget? Do they have the clearance? Will they be allowed to do it? Will Trump rail against them and fire them as traitors if they do it? All unknown at this point. In conclusion, John says, if you are a U.S. citizen planning to vote via the consulate in Dubai, please note all envelopes you use to mail your ballot must be open for inspection. Now, he goes on to say, as an update, U.S. Embassy, U.S. Embassy Abuja, I don't know where this is. I guess, is that in Nigeria? So maybe with the J sound, Abuja, Abuja. And U.S. Consulate Lagos also are asking American voters casting ballots from Nigeria to similarly have their envelopes open for inspection. So I bet this is happening all over the place. One more addition here, U.S. Embassy Muscat in Oman's instructions do not include the open envelope requirement. So if you are voting from Oman, how about that? If they don't have the open envelope requirement, but that may change by the time you get there, by the way. They might find out, oh no, best practices for our consulates is to require open envelopes. But at the moment, it says, if your state requires you to return paper voting forms or ballots to local elections officials by mail, then you can do so for free of any charge at the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate. But you may or may not have to have the thing unsealed. Somebody else replies, maybe the best approach is bring your open, unsealed, self-addressed, and self-stamped envelope to the embassy or consulate. Security will screen your envelope and return it to you. You may then seal your envelope and deposit the envelope in the drop box, which, of course, means in the end that you may or may not be showing I guess you can have your ballot sort of folded, I don't know, and then put it in the envelope, or maybe you can put your thumb over or hand over where the votes are indicated, or possibly not. You might be showing private security guards who are contracted by God only knows who, maybe Eric Prince. I'm voting for Biden. Now here I am putting it in this envelope and then putting it in this envelope and sealing it up. And you can see I haven't put anything dangerous in here. They nod and smile and say, yes, great. You put it in the box, you walk out. And then they said, that guy voted for Biden. They pull out the envelope and disappear it and tell Mr. Prince that they did everything that they were instructed to do. And you never know about it. I mean, it's just one of the risks I guess you're going to have to run if you are trying to vote from overseas. I guess the only other opportunity you have to cast your vote is to run the risk of getting COVID by flying home at great expense, if that's even possible for you, and casting your vote in person or in early voting back home in your home state, and then risking it all by flying back to where you were in the first place. It's pretty crazy, and these white powder attacks, I guess, giving them the opportunity to inspect those ballots. Weird. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Confounding possibilities. Not a huge number of votes, usually not a determinative number of votes being cast from overseas, but a lot. And in a close election, it will make a difference. And of course, they come into and are counted as votes from states all over the map. So it is entirely possible that, people's ballot spoliation could cause some problems. As Greg mentioned, what's his name? Is it Wasserman? Who has been kind of railing about the naked ballots, that would be the ones that that arrive in the hands of the clerk without the proper envelopes and sealing. Apparently a particular problem in Pennsylvania, but probably difficult everywhere that people are not, in the main, used to voting by mail. It'll be counterintuitive to most people that a ballot, unlike every other thing they've ever mailed to anyone for any reason, has to be in 2 envelopes. And of course, that makes things awkward. You can't just use 2 of your own envelopes because those envelopes are the same size, and fitting one inside the other won't do the trick. And so if you don't, or if you somehow screw up or lose or are told you have to open your very special ballot envelopes that are designed to fit one inside the other, you may run into some problems if you have to reopen these things and then reseal them in ways that'll satisfy a clerk thousands of miles away who has no idea what situation you faced at the consulate the day you cast your ballot. Or even if you're just mailing it absentee from right here in the United States, people screw things up. They put it in one envelope because everything goes in one envelope, except this thing, which says it needs to go in 2. Or whatever. Or, in some states, they're deliberately ridiculous with their requirements so that they can have the discretion to throw out any ballots that they feel like throwing out for whatever reason, fair or otherwise. So you got to be really careful with these things. But Wasserman, who is it, Dave Wasserman, who tweets as redistrict, that's who's been doing it too. Let me make sure I got the name right. I can just open up another Twitter window and find out just to be 100% sure. But yeah, he's been railing about this. Yes, Dave Wasserman, specifically with respect to Pennsylvania, and making this very good point. Most people will probably be able to fill these things out without too much trouble, where the requirements are not overly and purposefully overly onerous. Most people can follow those instructions and will want to. And if they haven't voted this way before, very often they get a sheet of instructions that says, and sometimes in capital letters, very large and bold, very important, follow these instructions or you could invalidate your ballot. But that's not foolproof either. Sometimes you give people very clear instructions and they just screw it up for one reason or another. Or they have someone with them who says, I know what I'm doing. I'm an expert. I do this all the time. Definitely do this. Not what I know it says that, but it doesn't really mean that. It means this. If you squint at it just right and interpret it this way, it means you sign it on the left rather than the right. Okay. And you end up screwing things up. As he was explaining, it only has to happen to a very small percentage of ballots for there to be a real impact because of the laws of large numbers. There are a lot of people voting this way in Pennsylvania. And he keeps saying, look, the usual rate in most elections of ballot spoliation, as they call it, from people improperly submitting their ballots for one reason or another, runs about, 5 to 6%. 5 to 6% of ballots submitted by mail, probably in any state, in any election, at any given time. There's just something wrong with the way it was done, and it at least calls the vote into question, if not invalidates it outright. And in states where it's possible that Trump might sneak by and eke out an electoral victory by you remember how it was in 2016, a combined total of 80,000 votes across 3 states. 5 to 6% ballot spoliation is a real issue, especially if voting by mail this time skews very heavily Democratic. So Wasserman's been shouting about it, and I think rightly so. And I know that like the other day, I happened to see him say, are Democrats thinking of spending some money on voter education here in Pennsylvania? And I think it has to be done everywhere, but it would be an enormous expense. But he was focused specifically on Pennsylvania for whatever reason and saying, are they going to do something about this? Are they going to educate people about how important it is to follow the instructions and what those instructions mean, or issue any clarifications if necessary? And I happened to see, I think Adam Bonin responded, we're actually on it. We are doing something about that. I don't know whether they were already in the works or it was in response to Wasserman's yelling about it, but apparently something is on the way. But time is short. So I've spent a lot of time on this for this purpose. You need to tell anybody you know, or tell yourself if you're doing this, that if you're voting absentee, by mail, what have you, and you're not 100% sure what you're doing, or you know someone else is doing it and you might think they might not be 100% sure, and it comes up in conversation, or you can bring it up in conversation, talk about these examples, talk about how important it is to follow the instructions. And if you're talking to somebody who's overseas, you can certainly share John Gambrell's story and tell them to have an eye out for all of this. As I mentioned in the comments to his discussion, there was somebody else giving instructions for generally how you should deal with voting at an embassy, bringing your envelopes open and unsealed, self-addressed, self-stamped, get it screened by security, they'll return it to you, then you'll conceal your envelope in front of them and deposit it in a drop box. And it comes with a link to one of the embassy and consulate in the United Arab Emirates, explaining, yes, okay, these are the rules here. Now, other people chimed in here, by the way. One person saying it's now sounding like the Ricin, or they put it in quotes, the Ricin letter from quote-unquote Canada was a plant in order to justify this sort of security operation. It certainly raises that suspicion. Others are just complaining about it being voter intimidation or vote tampering, which it kind of is. Here's somebody noting here that Missouri is asking overseas voters to use an online portal. I don't know whether that means voting via an online portal or use an online portal to securely download a ballot that you print out and bring somewhere. I don't know. It says, though, information is available on the Secretary of State website and provides a link so you could inspect it and go and take a look for yourself if you're interested. Let's see, then somebody else saying, I think when you're overseas, you actually scan your ballot and email it in. People might want to do that instead, but immediately followed by the admonition, no, you definitely cannot do that, at least not in my state, Illinois. Well, who knows what it's like in other states. I receive my ballot via email, but it must be printed out and returned via mail. And my guess is that if there are any states that will accept it as scanned and emailed, they're probably few in number. It might not be, in some states, the practice is, well, we'll take ballots like that from military personnel because situations are tough when you're deployed. But they're not supposed to take them that way. They just think no one will object if you say, well, they're military ballots. And we jump out of the way for anything military around here. At any rate, yeah, it's probably the case that you should not be relying on the idea of scanning it and emailing it in. And maybe that's something you got used to, but double, triple, and quadruple check whether this is the case where you are. And then lots of questions for Gambrell. Someone says, I can't be the only one asking here. Where does this requirement come from? Is it a Dubai thing? Is it for all U.S. consulates? What's going on? And he says, looking over the rest of the thread, it sounds like it's coming from U.S. security personnel. Do you have any contacts with other consulates to see if the same thing is happening there as well? And I guess so far, no answer about that. Although people saying, opining that the State Department would have to approve security measures, especially around ballots. And is the State Department, though, I would ask, in hands that you trust with something like this? I don't know. All right. Well, at any rate, yeah, certainly lots of questions swirling around what to do with mailing your ballot securely from overseas. Greg mentioned the article in The Atlantic covering a topic similar to that discussed in the 538 article from last week about the mechanics of states attempting to file their own slates of electors regardless of the outcome of the election inside that state. I feel like reading through that one because I feel like there might be some more detailed nuance and information and twists and turns to think about, but I don't think we're going to have the time to do that. I'll include it in the roundup for you to take a look at, and maybe I'll scan it off the afterwards, after the show today, and see whether there are specific parts that need to be highlighted perhaps on tomorrow's show or Friday. Speaking of which, housekeeping tip here too. I'll have to talk to Greg about it. Monday will be off the air as well. I know it seems like it's happening a lot these days, but it's Yom Kippur on Monday, and I have some obligations to take care of elsewhere. So I'll be doing that during the morning hours. We'll see how the weekend goes in terms of getting a all new show together for you. I have help waiting in the wings once again. Darwin Darko coming in with just the right time with another very important entry into our news roundup. Thanks again to his diligent reading of Stars and Stripes, a story that I've had an eye on for some time and have been actually reminded that we really ought to be addressing it, not just by Darwin, but by another of our friends and listeners, Judy Vincent, who also has some military connections, about the strange happenings in and around Fort Hood, where Judy had noted for me not long ago that I think at that point 4 soldiers had recently disappeared and then turned up murdered, and what the hell was going on around there, and why were we constantly hearing this news, and why wasn't it a bigger story? And I agreed that it really needed some attention, but of course things are so crazy on so many other fronts, we never got around to that. So I'm thanking Darwin for bringing us around to that. That's the easiest way to do it. If you can't move me off of the pile of crazy that we normally have to get through on a day-to-day basis, record it and send it to me, and I'll almost always eventually accept that offer of a 10-minute break from the air to play your material. So maybe I'll save that for Monday, and that'll get us part of the way home on preparing a new show for Monday. All right. Let's see. Other items that require some discussion. Short item that we might not need to wade all the way through. for all the detail. You'll just get the flavor of it from the headline. NBC News reporting the Department of Homeland Security awarding a $6 million in contracts to a firm where the person who claims to be the acting secretary for DHS, you know him, Chad Wolf. He's illegally in the position. Chad Wolf's wife is an executive at this particular company that got this particular contract that was worth $6 million all of a sudden. And isn't that interesting and problematic? And the answer is yes, but what are you going to do? They're grifting, thieving thugs, and nobody seems to be able to figure out a way to stop them, even though they're illegally in this position. A Homeland Security spokesperson, according to the subheader here, said Wolf was unaware of the contracts until contacted by the media. Wolf's Senate confirmation hearing is scheduled for today, Wednesday. So let's see whether that comes up in his discussion with senators. Here's the basic rundown. The consulting firm where the wife of the person purporting to be the acting Homeland Security Secretary, Chad Wolf, is an executive, has been awarded more than $6 million in contracts from the Department of Homeland Security since September of 2018, according to records on the federal government website USA Spending. Now, you might pause at this point and say, well, maybe her company does lots of things and and $6 million is not necessarily a huge part of their business in the grand scheme of things. And they consult with all sorts of departments in the government, and they've been a consultant to the DHS for a long time, and it just continued. And Chad Wolf doesn't have anything to do with it. Or it could be something else. So let's continue on. Wolf became chief of staff at the Transportation Security Administration, which is a DHS agency, the airport people, TSA. Chief of staff at TSA in 2017. And then chief of staff to Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen in 2018. Then he took over as acting secretary in November. So again, chief of staff at the TSA for 1 year, chief of staff at Homeland Security for another year. Then he's the chief of everything about Homeland Security, with or without Senate confirmation, accountable to no one, and sending federal officers to Portland to jump out and snatch people off the streets. That's some interesting rise there, right? Anyway, so he took over as acting secretary in November. He's been nominated now to become secretary. His confirmation hearing is today, started about 45 minutes ago, or was scheduled to anyway. So you might be keeping one eye or ear on that, for all I know. Well, here's the story, and you can tell me whether it's come up in hearing yet. Wolf's wife, Hope Wolf, is vice president of professional staff operations at Berkeley Research Group, a consulting firm. Although the company has a long history of federal contracts, it did not do work for the Department of Homeland Security until after Wolf became TSA's chief of staff in 2017. So that's not as clear a line as his becoming purported acting secretary of DHS. I don't know how much, if any, influence the chief of staff at TSA has on overall Homeland Security Department contracting. That's an open question. But, the grifters, they do tend to talk to one another about these things and say, yeah, it would be a great favor to me if we could get these guys in the door for DHS contracts. A DHS spokesperson said Wolf was not aware of the contracts until he was contacted by the media. Interesting. And it makes you wonder about, did his wife not ever say, hey, I'm doing work for your agency now? Anyway, at no time in any of his positions since joining DHS as acting secretary, Wolf been involved in awarding any contracts, the spokesperson said. Even if he were involved with the procurement process for this particular contract, which he was not, he would have had to recuse himself due to even the appearance of impropriety, except, of course, his whole service there has the appearance of impropriety, so whatever. Kyle Herrig, founder and president of Accountable.us, a left-leaning watchdog group, said the $6 million in contracts may be a conflict of interest. Herrig also noted that the largest asset listed on Wolf's federal financial disclosure form is his wife's $1.1 million retirement account at Berkeley Research Group. So that may mean something. Looks like we're almost at the end of the story, so I guess we'll finish it out. After Mr. Wolf joined DHS, it began pumping millions of dollars into his wife's firm, which also happens to be his largest financial asset, Herrig said. That arrangement is highly problematic and warrants congressional scrutiny. Berkeley Research Group declined to comment. According to USA Spending, Berkeley Research Group's contracts with DHS are for information technology software, but it is not known what specific software was provided or to what component of DHS. During his confirmation hearing, Wolf is likely to be asked about his role in the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy, which separated migrant parents and children in 2018, sending federal agents to protests in Portland, Oregon, and a whistleblower's complaint that DHS intentionally downplayed Russia's interference in the coming presidential election. But I guess this, too, can be added to the list, and maybe, if you've got one eye on it, you can tell us whether it gets brought up. Thanks to Julia Ainsley for putting the piece together for NBC News and putting it on our radar. All right, and there might be a perfectly rational explanation for all of it, and I'm sure he would be happy to have it all figured out right there at his confirmation hearings as well. All right, let's see. Other items that probably require some discussion. Let's see. All right, I'll avoid QAnon for a little while, although, maybe I'll mention this just to whet your appetite for it. Michael Isikoff reporting for Yahoo News on this one. In an apparent play for QAnon supporters, GOP attack ads claim Democrat lawmakers are defending, quote, sex offenders. That's what it says here. The ad couldn't sound more ominous as darkened images of quiet suburban neighborhoods roll on the screen. A woman's voice delivers a scary message. On every street, in every neighborhood, around every corner, every corner, sex offenders are living among us. And then comes the kicker. The real kicker is they're Republican elected officials. But, okay, the kicker here is U.S. Representative Tom Malinowski, a freshman Democrat from New Jersey in a swing district, quote, tried to make it easier for predators to hide in the shadows. The woman continues. Malinowski worked as the top lobbyist for a radical group that opposed the National Sex Offender Registry. As attack ads go, this one, entitled Shadow, and recently released by the National Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, would be considered extreme even by the usual standards of political mudslinging. There's no evidence that Malinowski, who, before being elected to Congress in 2018, served for years as the Washington Director of Human Rights Watch, and later as Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy and Human Rights, had ever done anything to protect sexual predators or lobbied against the sex offender registry. But to some, the harsh attack ad is part of a nationwide QAnon strategy that the Republican Campaign Committee appears to be deploying to exploit the fears and paranoia fueled by the bizarre conspiracy cult, convinced that Democrats are working with the, quote, deep state, sex traffickers, and pedophiles to sabotage Donald Trump's presidency. You know all the rest of that story at this point, but interesting. Keep an eye out for that. See if it's happening in any other districts besides just this one. I wouldn't be surprised if since it's got no basis really even in this election, why not? And I assume that they wouldn't just produce this ad and publicize it just for one congressional race. They probably plan to roll it out all over the place. Might even be their idea of an October surprise. All right, let's see. Let's jump over to a tweet thread from, a favorite of many of you out there, Representative Katie Porter, pointing us to a story in the Washington Post that we haven't yet read about, but giving her rundown of it. And she summarizes it this way. Congress gave the president $1 billion to use his wartime powers under the Defense Production Act to buy masks and ventilators, because of that whole COVID thing. And guess what? He didn't do it. Instead, he spent it on aircraft parts, among other things. That was predictable, which is why I said in April that the Defense Production Act orders should be public. And she then includes in the next tweet a link to her op-ed from April on why we need Defense Production Act transparency. As I wrote then, and it remains true today, requiring DPA transparency is a key step toward stopping the deception and starting the recovery. But for now, let's jump over to the Washington Post write-up of the actual story about that money being diverted. Pentagon used taxpayer money meant for masks and swabs to make jet engine parts and body armor. And a lot of people jumped on this story yesterday and said, this is looting, and the kind of looting that Trump grifters have been accused of perpetrating all along. And now here it is finally laid out for all of us to see. We take pandemic money and just spend it on contracting with Trump cronies instead, and buying stuff that we don't need and that the money wasn't supposed to be for. But then others, of course, then jumping on that and saying, oh, you know what the president's rule is: when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So look out, right? Except, of course, if they're looting body armor, I suppose the shooting is a lot less effective. But it was their line, so they anticipated, and so they said, if we're going to be looting, we might as well loot some body armor in case the shooting starts. So there you go. Shortly after Congress passed the CARES Act, the Pentagon began redirecting pandemic-related money to defense contractors. Aaron Gregg and Yegane Torbati reporting this piece. $1 billion fund that Congress gave the Pentagon in March to build up the country's supplies of medical equipment has instead been mostly funneled to defense contractors and used to make things such as jet engine parts, body armor, and dress uniforms. Super important. The change illustrates how one taxpayer-backed effort to battle the novel coronavirus, which has killed more than 200,000 Americans, was instead diverted toward patching up long-standing perceived gaps in military supplies. The CARES Act, which Congress passed earlier this year, gave the Pentagon money to prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. But a few weeks later, the Defense Department began reshaping how it would award the money in a way that represented a major departure from Congress's intent, purse strings and whatnot. The payments were made even though U.S. health officials think major funding gaps in pandemic response still remain. Robert Redfield from the CDC said in Senate testimony last week that states desperately need $6 billion to distribute vaccines to Americans early next year, even if we get them. Many U.S. hospitals still face a severe shortage of N95 masks, and these are the types of problems that money was originally intended to address. This is part and parcel of whether we have the budget priorities that actually serve our public safety, or whether we have a government that's captured by special interests, said Mandy Smithberger, a defense analyst at the Project on Government Oversight, a watchdog group, as you well know. DoD officials contend that they have sought to strike a balance between boosting American medical production and supporting the defense industry. Why? Well, they consider, of course, the health of the defense industry critical to national security. Not the health like avoiding COVID, but the health of their bottom line, I guess. The Pentagon, which as of 2016 employed more than 156,000 people working in acquisitions alone, also has lent its expertise to the Department of Health and Human Services as it seeks to purchase billions of dollars in needed medical equipment. We are thankful the Congress provided authorities and resources that enabled the executive branch to invest in domestic production of critical medical resources and protect key defense capabilities from the consequences of COVID, Ellen Lord, the Pentagon's Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, said in a statement, we need to always remember that economic security and national security are very tightly interrelated, and our industrial base is really the nexus of the two. That's not really a very satisfactory answer for why it happened, and I could imagine a much better one, of course. And you never know. When it comes right down to it, logistics is a weird thing, and I could be convinced that under certain circumstances, it was somehow considered a response to the COVID crisis to divert some of the money away from swabs, masks, and ventilators, per se. But jet engine parts and body armor and dress uniforms, that's a hard sell. And it doesn't look like they're working very hard to actually do it either. All right, that's about it for stories that we can sneak in under the wire. Of course, there's plenty more. And anytime Katie Porter speaks to an issue, you want to perk up your ears and listen. Lots of other things to discuss. We still have tomorrow and Friday to do it, and I guess if we can't cram it into any of those, then at least I have my work cut out for me on Monday. Plenty of material, certainly. It's just a question of whether or not there will be time to record it for you. But again, thanks to Darwin, I do have your submission, working on getting it ready for air. And let's see, speaking of getting ready for air, Justice Putnam, already ready for air with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. And here's what he's got on tap for you today. Let's see, the GOP falls in line with McConnell's gambit to stack the court before the election. And then the Trump administration siphoned hundreds of millions of dollars intended for, here we go, the pandemic supplies. More information. Good. He can follow up and give you all the juiciest details on what happened in that story. He's got the Chad Wolf's wife story. Look at this. A U.S. asphalt company pleaded guilty to bribing officials in Brazil, Ecuador, and Venezuela for almost a decade. So, news from everywhere. All corners coming up next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Speaking of international news, check this out. Where all wine industry workers in the Basque country of Spain must now undergo a COVID-19 test to prevent putting the grape harvest at risk, and Mexican authorities preparing arrest warrants against Mexican soldiers in the infamous 2014 missing student teacher case.